In this video, we are going to look at homeostasis, which can seem complicated, but really just a process of maintaining a stable internal environment. If you think about one of the cells in your body, it needs certain conditions for it to be able to function properly. For example, it can be hot, it can be too cold, it can be too acidic, too alkaline, or very good supply of glucose in water. To achieve all of this, our body regulate everything, make sure that everything kept around the right level. That said, we don't keep everything exactly constant. For example, our temperature and glucose level do fluctuate, but only within small bounds. As per definition, we can say that homeostasis is the regulation of conditions inside the body to maintain a stable internal environment in response to changes in both internal and external conditions. Now, this last bit about being is response to change in both internal and external conditions just mean that we can maintain our environment even if change is that he can be outside of ourselves. For example, if we walk counting a snow or we burn in this a hard desert, still keep our cell at 37 degrees. To do this, our body uses automatic control system that can basically recognize when there is a change from optimal condition and then signal to reverse that changes so that level go back to normal. Normal automatic controller system have three main components to know about the receptors which detect a change such as rise in temperature, coordination center such as the brain, spinal cord which interpret that changes, and the side one is to be dumb about it, and finally a factors which the things that carry out the change generally. These are either muscles that might contract all the glands that can release hormones. A problem though is that these components might be in different parts of body, so we need some way to send signals between them, and is this is where the nervous and endocrine system come in. We are looking each of them is in detail. But basically the nervous system sends a very fast and precise electrical signals through nerves which allow us to respond to things very quickly, such as when we touch a sharp object. The endocrine system remain meanwhile relies on hormones, either small chemical release into bloodstream, and although they travel throughout the entire body, then only affect the certain cells that have the right receptors. The things to remember is that the endocrine system is generally slower, longer lasting, and more generalized than the nervous system. Okay, so we have now looked at different components of the automatic controller system and also how they communicate with each other. The last thing we do consider is how these systems actually work in real life. This mechanism is called negative feedback, and it's actually pretty simple. Once you understand it, basically, whenever the level of something gets too high, like anything increases, the negative feedback actually decreases again coming to normal level. Let's say that glucose or whatever it is decreases too much and the level is now too low. Well, negative feedback will just increases it again, so basically just as the whatever changes was there. Let's discuss a scenario. Say we walk in a room but it's really cold. Below temperature will be detected by receptors searches in our skin, and nervous system will then send impulses to coordination center like brain, spinal cord, and then interpret the information, then send another set of signal to effectors reaches our muscles and carry out the useful responses like shivering. Even a bit of time, this shivering will increases our body temperature and return to normal. But what if this goes too far and instead of returning to normal, we actually gets too hot? when now a different sets of receptors were detected and this rising temperature and these send their own signals to our coordination centers. This in turn would cause a different group of factors to carry out responses such as sweating. In time, our temperature would go back to normal, and then if we could have it to cold, the whole process would start over again. So really what we have overlooked is a loop. If the level of something gets you low, our automatic control system brings them back up to normal through negative feedback. And if they then get too high, another control system will bring them back down. And that is the homeostasis for you. Basically, an overall process of maintaining a stable internal environment for us. Thank you. Now I'm just going to show you one video so that you are able to understand concept very clearly.
What is homeostasis? To be brief and to the point, homeostasis is the relatively constant state maintained by the body. Mainly this means that over time, the internal body will maintain a stable environment. So, for example, if the external temperature is cold or hot, the internal body temperature will remain relatively constant at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. The internal body temperature may vary a little above or below this number, but that will still be considered normal. So let's say we took someone's body temperature over a certain period of time. If we plot that on a chart, it may look something like this. Here, body temperature rose slightly, and here it fell a little. But the normal body temperature range is from 97.7 to 99.5 degrees. So our subject was inside the normal range throughout that time span. Homeostasis doesn't just apply to body temperature, but many other conditions as well. The human body needs to maintain a certain range of nutrients in the bloodstream, such as water, glucose, sodium, and other elements as well. We get our blood work done from time to time to check and make sure we don't have high glucose or cholesterol levels or too low levels of certain vitamins or minerals. This, in essence, is to check and make sure our body is maintaining homeostatic conditions. Set point is an important term when discussing homeostasis. Set point is a normal range that the body tries to stay in. For instance, the normal range for systolic blood pressure is between 80 and 120. So homeostasis is sought by the body to keep systolic blood pressure in this range or set point. However, the body can change the set point. In many people, weight gain leads to higher systolic blood pressure. This could be due to many factors. But the point is that the body changed the blood pressure set point to keep homeostasis. So now, maybe after the weight gain, someone's systolic blood pressure may be at 140, which is considered unhealthy and at risk for some diseases. But the body felt to keep homeostasis, it needed to change and pump blood harder. The ability of the body to maintain homeostasis is crucial to life, and each of the systems in the body plays important roles. It's oftentimes easier to understand homeostasis by constructing a model to make the concept clearer. Many sources use a fish tank comparison. Here we have a fish tank filled with water. The water represents body fluid or the internal environment. The glass that encloses the water or fluid would be the skin, creating a barrier separating internal from external. The fish in the tank represent cells, which obviously want to stay alive. But the cells need nutrients from the external environment in order to survive. The cells need oxygen, so we can put an air pump in the tank, which would represent the lungs, pumping oxygen into the tank. Okay, now we need a filter to get rid of wastes, which would represent the kidneys. Next, we need to add a heater to keep a constant temperature, and the heater would represent the muscles. And finally, we need food, or at least the nutrients contained in food. So we hook up a feeder to our fish tank to feed those fish, or cells, and the feeder would represent the digestive system. So our fish tank is complete, and with everything working together, we have relatively stable and constant conditions, which equals homeostasis. Keep in mind that our fish tank model only covers a few of the aspects involved in maintaining homeostasis, as there are actually far more mechanisms involved in the body keeping at a state of homeostasis. And that be the basics on homeostasis. Homeostatic control mechanisms or systems. In order to maintain homeostasis, cells must be in an environment that allows them to function properly with changing external conditions. Almost all of the organs and systems in the body must work to maintain homeostasis. If the body needs to change the internal environment, it does so through what is called homeostatic control mechanisms. For instance, when you go for a run, your body needs more oxygen, and your body produces more carbon dioxide. So, the internal environment must adapt to the changing needs. During your run, your breathing will increase, bringing more oxygen in and eliminating the increased production of carbon dioxide. Your heartbeat and stroke volume will increase, thus increasing the amount of nutrient-rich blood being sent throughout your body. This process of the body adjusting to change is called a feedback control loop or feedback control system. These control loops transmit information in mainly two ways: through nervous impulses or by chemical messengers called hormones. Whether the nervous impulses or hormones are transmitting the information, the feedback control loops work in the same way and have the same basic components. The feedback control loops consist of four main components: a sensor mechanism, an integrator or control center, an effector mechanism, and feedback. Hormone-producing glands and sensory nerve cells can act as homeostatic sensors. If something changes outside of the normal set point range for homeostasis, a sensor transmits a signal to the next component of the feedback loop, the integrator. The integrator is the control center of the feedback loop, and many times it is in an area of the brain. It gets this signal or variable and analyzes it and checks it with other signals or variables it has received from other sensors. It checks the value of the variables it has received against the normal set point range for those variables. If the integrator determines these variables are outside of the normal set point range, then some type of action is needed. If action is necessary, the integrator sends a signal to the third component of the feedback control loop, the effector mechanism. Effectors are organs, like glands or muscles, which provide the response that the integrator or control center desires. The goal of the effectors is to influence or change the values of the variables. This can be positive or negative changes to the variables, such as increasing or decreasing heart rate, or altering the concentration of glucose in the bloodstream, glucose being the main source of fuel for cells. As these effectors make changes, the variables attain new values, and this is sent back through the feedback control loop. For instance, if you're walking, then you start jogging, effectors will increase your heart rate based on the mechanisms of the feedback control loop. Many sources use a diagram of a furnace controlled by a thermostat to explain this process more clearly. Here we have a house, and here we have a person. Let's say that in both situations, a stimulus happens. That being a cold front blows in, causing a decrease in temperature. The house has a thermometer, which is its sensor, and the person has temperature receptors in the skin, which are the sensor mechanism for the body. The thermometer sends the information that the temperature or variable has decreased through wires to its integrator, the thermostat. The temperature receptors in the skin send the variable change through nerve fibers to the brain, or the integrator for the body in this situation. The integrators or control centers for both the body and the house check the value of the newly received variables against the set point range that each of them has allowed for this type of variable. Since this temperature variable change does not lie within that set point range, the integrators send a signal to effectors to do something to get these variables within this set point range. In the case of the house, the thermostat sends a message through wires to the furnace to crank the heat up. In the body, the brain sends a message through nerve fibers to the muscles to start shivering and generate some heat. In both the house and the body of the person, the heat that is generated brings them both to a state of homeostasis. Once homeostasis is reached, both sensor mechanisms, the thermometer and temperature receptors in the skin, are sending new variable values or feedback to their integrators that lie within the set point ranges. One note worth repeating: homeostatic control systems can be based on positive or negative feedback, and that be the homeostatic control mechanisms, or systems. Control of homeostasis. There are many different feedback control loops in the body, and these homeostatic control systems can be based on positive or negative feedback. The key difference between positive and negative feedback is the response to the change. Negative feedback control loops are the more common of the two, and they respond to a change by helping the body maintain a stable homeostatic condition. An example of this is when the body temperature starts to change. When it's cold out and body temperature decreases below the set point range, which is the normal range that the body tries to stay within, the negative feedback loop will cause the body to shiver, producing heat, and ultimately body temperature will return to within the set point range. The negative feedback loop will do the same if body temperature increases, like during exercise. The negative feedback loop will cause the body to sweat, which will reduce body temperature to within the set point range. Positive feedback control loops do not help the body maintain a stable homeostatic condition. Positive feedback control loops amplify the change that is happening to the body. So let's say that someone has a bacterial infection. The immune system signals the brain to increase the body's temperature set point, causing a person to have a fever. This can be a natural normal reaction. However, in some instances, it could create a harmful positive feedback loop where metabolic rate is elevated and the body is producing heat faster than it can get rid of. So a person may be shivering and sweating at the same time. And if body temperature increases above 108 degrees Fahrenheit or 42 degrees Celsius, it could be extremely dangerous and even fatal. In a couple of instances, positive feedback control loops can be beneficial to the body. Let's say someone gets a cut in a blood vessel wall. A positive feedback control loop begins, and platelets, which are floating around in circulating blood, recognize the damaged area and begin to stick together to slow the loss of blood and patch up the tear in the wall. They also release chemicals that attract more platelets to the area to help stop the blood loss. Eventually a blood clot is formed, the loss of blood is kept to a minimum, and the positive feedback loop ends. And that be the positive and negative feedback in control systems for homeostasis.